Welcome to Disaster Tales. No more sleep today, boss. No more sleep today, boss. Have you ever heard a child crying outside your house when you knew there was no child for miles, and then realized the crying wasn't coming from outside at all? That was the question I kept asking myself after everything happened, because even now, years later, I still don't know which part of that first night scares me more, the sound itself, or the fact that something inside me seemed to recognize it. It was October 2001, and I was living alone in a small house outside a town in West Virginia, surrounded by trees and old dirt roads where you could drive for 10 minutes without seeing another person. The first time I heard the crying, it was 2:13 in the morning. I was lying in bed when a faint sound came from the woods behind my house, soft and distant, like a baby trying not to wake anyone. I sat up and listened. The crying stopped. I waited. Then it started again. This time, it sounded closer. I got out of bed and walked to the window, but the woods were completely dark, and the only thing I could see was the reflection of my own face in the glass. I told myself it was an animal. Then the crying came again. Right outside my bedroom. I froze. There was no way it could have traveled that far that quickly, and yet I could hear it clearly, a small child crying somewhere on the other side of the wall. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the house. Nothing. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The woods were silent. Then I heard the crying again. Behind me. Inside the house. I turned so quickly that I nearly dropped the flashlight. The sound was coming from my bedroom. I ran inside and stopped in the doorway. Nothing had moved. My bed was empty. The room was dark. But on the floor beside my bed were tiny wet footprints. They started near the window and continued across the carpet until they stopped directly beside my pillow. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation, even though I couldn't think of one. I cleaned the floor, locked every door, and went to work. That evening, I called my neighbor, an older man named Walter, and asked if anyone had children living nearby. He became quiet. Then he asked me something I still remember. "Did you hear crying?" I asked how he knew. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he told me that people had heard it before, usually around the same time of night, but nobody had ever found a child. I asked him where the sound came from. He looked toward the woods. "Never follow it." I laughed nervously. He didn't. That night, I stayed awake with every light on. At 2:13, the crying started again. I sat completely still. The sound came from the woods. Then from the porch. Then from the hallway. And finally, from inside my bedroom. I turned toward the doorway. A small voice whispered my name. "Sarah." I couldn't breathe. Then something knocked 3 times from underneath my bed. And the crying stopped. For several seconds, I couldn't even blink. I stared at the darkness beneath the bed, trying to convince myself that the sound had come from the pipes, the floorboards, anything that had a normal explanation. Then I heard a tiny breath. It came from underneath me. Not beneath the bed. Beneath the floor. I slowly backed away, keeping the flashlight aimed at the gap beneath the bed frame. My hand was shaking so badly that the beam jumped across the walls. 3 more knocks came from below. This time, they were slower. Knock. 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 I wanted to leave the room, but the floorboards beneath my feet suddenly creaked as if someone had shifted their weight directly underneath them. Then the crying started again. Except it wasn't coming from beneath the bed anymore. It was coming from inside the wall beside my head. I turned toward it. The crying became louder. Then softer. Then almost like a whisper. And finally, I heard the same small voice again. Sarah. I'm cold. My blood ran cold. Because I had never told anyone my name was Sarah. Not Walter. Not anyone in that town. I stepped backward until my shoulders hit the bedroom door. The flashlight beam dropped toward the floor. For 1 second, I saw something dark beneath the bed. Not a face. Not a body. Just 2 tiny wet footprints appearing slowly on the carpet, one after another, as if an invisible child was standing up. Then the bedroom door slammed shut behind me. I didn't go back to sleep after the knocking under my bed. I sat against the bedroom wall until sunrise, staring at the space beneath the mattress and listening to the house settle around me, trying to convince myself that exhaustion had turned every ordinary sound into something impossible. At 6:40 in the morning, I finally got up. There was nothing under the bed. No footprints. No water. No explanation for the voice that had said my name. I went to work anyway. I spent the entire morning feeling sick, but I blamed it on the night before, until I nearly collapsed in the hospital cafeteria. The nurse sitting across from me noticed my hands shaking. You look terrible. I didn't sleep. She laughed. Neither did half the staff. I tried to smile, but the smell of coffee suddenly made my stomach turn. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. That afternoon, I went to see Dr. Bennett. He had been my doctor for years, and I trusted him enough to tell him about the nausea, the dizziness, and the strange pain I'd been feeling in my lower abdomen. He ordered blood work. Then he asked me to wait. 20 minutes later, he returned with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Sarah, when was your last period? I told him. He stared at the paper. Then he looked at me. You're pregnant. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the words made no sense. No. He didn't smile. Yes. I shook my head. That isn't possible. He lowered his voice. The test is positive. I stared at him. I had been alone for months. There was nobody. Not even a possibility. Dr. Bennett scheduled an ultrasound for the following morning. I went home that night terrified, but there was something worse than the pregnancy itself. At 2:13 a.m., the crying started again. I stayed in bed. I didn't move. The sound came from outside. Then the hallway. Then directly beside my bedroom door. I heard a tiny voice whisper. Mommy. I covered my mouth. The crying stopped. The silence afterward was somehow worse. I waited for footsteps, for another knock, for anything that would prove I hadn't imagined it. Nothing came. Then the mattress shifted slightly beneath me, as if someone had placed a hand against the frame from underneath. I held my breath and stared at the floor. It shifted again. I didn't look. I couldn't. For the first time, I wondered if whatever had been beneath my bed wasn't trying to get out. Maybe it had only been waiting for me to realize it was there. The next morning, I went to the hospital. Dr. Bennett performed the ultrasound himself. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he moved the monitor slightly toward me. I saw the shape on the screen. A tiny body. A heartbeat. I started crying. That's my baby. He didn't answer. I looked at him. What? He stared at the screen. The measurements are wrong. How wrong? He swallowed. According to this, you're approximately 12 weeks pregnant. I felt cold. That can't be right. I know. He printed the image. Then he stopped. His face changed. What? He pointed at the image. There was something behind the fetus. A dark shape. Almost like a second body pressed against it. What is that? I don't know. He tried another scan. The shape disappeared. Then it appeared again. This time, it was closer. I asked him what it meant. He said he didn't know. But I knew he was lying. That night, I called him from my house. He answered immediately. Sarah, don't panic. I froze. How did you know I was going to panic? There was silence. Then he asked me something that made my blood run cold. Did you hear crying last night? I couldn't answer. He whispered. Because I heard it too. The call ended. I stood alone in my kitchen. Then I heard 3 knocks on the back door. I looked through the glass. Nobody was there. But something was written across the fogged window from the outside. 3 words. It knows you're here. I didn't tell anyone about the writing on the window. I wiped it away before sunrise and spent the entire morning pretending I hadn't seen it, but every time I touched the glass, I remembered the words and the way they had appeared from the other side. That afternoon, Dr. Bennett called me. He asked me to come to his office alone. When I arrived, he had an old folder sitting on his desk. He didn't tell me where he found it. He simply opened it and pushed a photograph toward me. It showed a small church surrounded by trees. The building was abandoned, its windows broken and its wooden doors covered with boards. What's this? My mother used to talk about it. I looked at him. She lived here. Yes. He opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings from the 1960s and handwritten reports from people who had lived in the area. All of them described the same thing. Women hearing a baby crying in the woods. Women becoming pregnant without knowing how. Women claiming something stood beside their beds at night. And every story ended the same way. The woman disappeared. I asked him why nobody had told me. He looked ashamed. Because nobody wants to talk about it. He showed me one final document. It was dated 1967. A doctor had written about a patient named Evelyn Carter. She had been pregnant for 12 weeks when she claimed the baby wasn't hers. The doctor didn't believe her. 3 nights later, she disappeared from the hospital. Her bed was still warm. Her clothes were still inside the room. But she was gone. I looked at Dr. Bennett. What does this have to do with me? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked. Have you been to the church? No. You need to stay away from it. That should have been enough. It wasn't. That night, I drove there. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that all of this was superstition. Maybe I wanted something I could understand. The church was 20 minutes outside town. I parked beside the road and walked through the trees. The building looked older than I expected. The front doors were chained shut. I walked around the side. There was a small basement entrance hidden behind weeds. The door was already open. Inside, the air smelled like wet earth. I turned on my flashlight. There were old chairs. Broken religious statues. Stacks of moldy papers. Then I saw the wall. Names had been written across it. Dozens of names. Women. Dates. And beside each name was the same time. 2:13 a.m. I stepped closer. The newest name had been written recently. My name. Sarah Miller, 2001. I backed away. Something moved upstairs. I heard footsteps. Then a child's voice. Mommy. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something standing between the trees. A tall figure. Too thin. Its head was tilted toward me. I drove away. That night, I locked every door. I checked the windows twice. Then I dragged a chair beneath the bedroom handle, even though I knew a chair wouldn't stop whatever had been following me. At 2:13, I woke up. The bedroom door was open. I knew I had closed it. I sat up. The room was freezing. Then I saw something beside the bed. A small wet footprint. Then another. Then another. They stopped beside my stomach. The baby moved. Hard. For the first time, I felt it clearly. 3 slow movements. Then a whisper came from the darkness. Not from outside. Not from the hallway. From inside my bedroom. Don't let him take me. I started crying. Because I knew that voice. It was the voice of a little girl. And she sounded terrified. I couldn't move. I kept staring into the darkness, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but the room seemed to get darker instead. Then I felt another movement beneath my hand. This time, it wasn't from the baby. Something pressed against the other side of my stomach. Slowly. Like a palm. I pulled my hand away. The pressure disappeared. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then 3 quiet knocks came from inside the wall beside my bed. I counted them without breathing. 1, 2, 3. And the little girl's voice whispered again. Please don't sleep. I stayed completely still, afraid that even breathing too loudly would make something answer. The clock beside my bed continued ticking, each second sounding impossibly loud in the silence. Then the handle of the bedroom door moved downward. Slowly. It stopped. A few seconds passed. Then it moved again. This time, the chair beneath it scraped softly across the floor. I stared at it, unable to scream. And from the other side of the door, I heard a quiet voice whisper my name. Not the little girl. A man's voice. Sarah. I didn't tell anyone about the writing on the window. I wiped it away before sunrise and spent the entire morning pretending I hadn't seen it, but every time I touched the glass, I remembered the words and the way they had appeared from the other side. That afternoon, Dr. Bennett called me. He asked me to come to his office alone. When I arrived, he had an old folder sitting on his desk. He didn't tell me where he found it. He simply opened it and pushed a photograph toward me. It showed a small church surrounded by trees. The building was abandoned, its windows broken and its wooden doors covered with boards. What's this? My mother used to talk about it. I looked at him. She lived here. Yes. He opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings from the 1960s and handwritten reports from people who had lived in the area. All of them described the same thing. Women hearing a baby crying in the woods. Women becoming pregnant without knowing how. Women claiming something stood beside their beds at night. And every story ended the same way. The woman disappeared. I asked him why nobody had told me. He looked ashamed. Because nobody wants to talk about it. He showed me one final document. It was dated 1967. A doctor had written about a patient named Evelyn Carter. She had been pregnant for 12 weeks when she claimed the baby wasn't hers. The doctor didn't believe her. 3 nights later, she disappeared from the hospital. Her bed was still warm. Her clothes were still inside the room. But she was gone. I looked at Dr. Bennett. What does this have to do with me? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked. Have you been to the church? No. You need to stay away from it. That should have been enough. It wasn't. That night, I drove there. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof that all of this was superstition. Maybe I wanted something I could understand. The church was 20 minutes outside town. I parked beside the road and walked through the trees. The building looked older than I expected. The front doors were chained shut. I walked around the side. There was a small basement entrance hidden behind weeds. The door was already open. Inside, the air smelled like wet earth. I turned on my flashlight. There were old chairs. Broken religious statues. Stacks of moldy papers. Then I saw the wall. Names had been written across it. Dozens of names. Women. Dates. And beside each name was the same time. 2:13 a.m. I stepped closer. The newest name had been written recently. My name. Sarah Miller, 2001. I backed away. Something moved upstairs. I heard footsteps. Then a child's voice. Mommy. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw something standing between the trees. A tall figure. Too thin. Its head was tilted toward me. I drove away. That night, I locked every door. At 2:13, I woke up. The bedroom door was open. I knew I had closed it. I sat up. The room was freezing. Then I saw something beside the bed. A small wet footprint. Then another. Then another. They stopped beside my stomach. The baby moved. Hard. For the first time, I felt it clearly. 3 slow movements. Then a whisper came from the darkness. Not from outside. Not from the hallway. From inside my bedroom. Don't let him take me. I started crying. Because I knew that voice. It was the voice of a little girl. And she sounded terrified. I stayed frozen beneath the blankets, listening to the silence after her last word. I wanted to believe the voice had come from the hallway, from a neighbor's house, from a television left on somewhere, anything that could give it a normal explanation. But the house was completely silent. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming. I looked at the clock. 2:14 a.m. Only 1 minute had passed. The footprint beside my bed was still wet. I could see a tiny drop of water slowly spreading into the carpet. I reached for my phone, but my fingers wouldn't stop shaking. The screen lit up. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. Then the phone vibrated in my hand. A message had appeared. There was no number. No name. Just one sentence. You should have listened to him. I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then, from beneath the bed, I heard a quiet breath. I stopped breathing myself. Another breath followed. Slow. Close. Almost patient. I didn't look down. I couldn't. The mattress sank slightly beside my legs, as if someone had just placed a hand on it from underneath. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then I felt the baby move again. 3 times. Exactly like before. And somewhere beneath me, something whispered. I'm still here. After that night, I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something watching me. The pregnancy continued normally during the day, at least according to the doctors, but every night something changed. The baby moved whenever the lights went out. It never moved when I was awake during the day. Only at night. Only at 2:13. Dr. Bennett performed another ultrasound. The image looked different. The fetus had grown normally. But the dark shape was still there. This time, it looked like a hand. 5 long fingers wrapped around the baby's body. I stared at the screen. "Can you remove it?" He shook his head. "It's not physically there." "Then what am I looking at?" He didn't answer. That night, I asked my neighbor Walter about the church. His face went pale. "You went there?" "Yes." He sat down slowly. "My wife went there." I stared at him. "When?" 1978. "What happened?" He looked toward the window. "She was pregnant." I already knew what he was going to say. "She heard the crying." Walter told me his wife had disappeared 3 days before giving birth. The police searched the woods. They found nothing. But Walter had found something inside their bedroom. A wet handprint on the wall. At first, I thought he was telling me an old story. Then he showed me the photograph. The handprint was still there. 5 long fingers. The exact shape I had seen on my ultrasound. I went home terrified. That night, I placed a chair against my bedroom door. I turned on every light. I stayed awake until 2:13. Nothing happened. 2:14. Nothing. 2:15. I almost laughed. Then I heard breathing behind me. I turned. The chair was still against the door. But someone was standing beside my bed. A man. At least 7 feet tall. His body looked impossibly thin. His face was hidden in darkness. He didn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then he slowly raised one hand. 5 fingers. The same hand from the ultrasound. I whispered. "What do you want?" He leaned toward me. His voice sounded like several people speaking at once. "What's mine?" I screamed. The lights exploded. The room went black. Something touched my stomach. I felt the baby move violently. Then I heard a little girl screaming. "Run!" I grabbed the flashlight and ran into the hallway. Behind me, the bedroom door slammed shut. I stood there crying. Then I heard the man speak from inside the room. "You can't hide her from me." I didn't know who he meant. I didn't know why he wanted my baby. But I knew one thing. He had called the baby her. The next morning, I returned to Dr. Bennett. He looked at my face. "You saw him." I stared at him. "You've seen him too." He didn't answer. He opened a drawer and removed an old photograph. It showed the abandoned church. Standing in front of it was his mother. She was holding a newborn baby. Behind her stood the same tall figure. Dr. Bennett's hands were shaking. "My mother survived," he whispered. "Then why didn't she tell anyone?" "She did." "What happened?" He looked at me. Nobody believed her. Then he turned the photograph over. There was one sentence written on the back. "The child always survives." I couldn't stop staring at the photograph. There was something about the woman's expression that frightened me more than the figure behind her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't crying. She looked like someone who had already realized that surviving wasn't the same as escaping. I pointed at the baby. How old was she when this was taken? Hours old. I looked closer. The baby's eyes were open. Not slightly. Completely open. Looking directly toward the camera. My stomach tightened. "That's impossible." Dr. Bennett didn't respond. I turned the photograph over again. The sentence seemed different now, although I knew it hadn't changed. "The child always survives." I read it twice. Then I noticed something written beneath it in much smaller handwriting. The mother doesn't. My hands went cold. Who wrote that? Dr. Bennett took the photograph from me. He stared at the writing for several seconds before putting it back in the drawer. I've never seen that before. I wanted to believe him. But his voice had changed. That night, I stayed at a hotel instead of going home. I checked the room twice before locking the door. There was no church nearby. No woods. No old house. No reason for me to feel afraid. At 2:13 a.m., I woke up anyway. The room was silent. Then the baby moved. Once. Twice. 3 times. I sat up slowly. The bathroom light was on. I was certain I had turned it off. I stared at the narrow gap beneath the door. A shadow passed across it. Then stopped. I held my breath. Something on the other side whispered my name. And this time, the voice sounded exactly like mine. By the time I reached 8 months, nobody in town would come near my house. People crossed the street when they saw me. The church had become the only thing anyone wanted to talk about, but nobody would say its name. Dr. Bennett told me I needed to stay in the hospital. He said the pregnancy had become dangerous. I agreed. I didn't know that he had already made another decision. He planned to perform the delivery himself. The night before the procedure, he showed me the old records. Every woman who had carried the child had died during labor. Every doctor who had tried to remove it had died afterward. I stared at him. Then why are you doing this? He looked exhausted. Because I think I know how to stop it. At 2:13 a.m., the hospital lights flickered. The monitors started beeping. Then every clock in the building stopped. 2:13. Dr. Bennett looked at me. He's here. The door opened. Nobody was standing outside. Then the hallway lights went out one by one. We heard footsteps approaching. Slow. Heavy. 3 knocks came from the door. Dr. Bennett locked it. The handle moved. Once. Twice. Then stopped. He began the procedure. I remember pain. I remember screaming. I remember hearing a child's voice telling me not to look toward the corner. I looked anyway. The tall figure was standing there. Dr. Bennett froze. The thing pointed toward the operating table. Then every machine in the room turned on at once. The heart monitor showed a second heartbeat. Not mine. Not the baby's. Something else. Dr. Bennett whispered. That's impossible. The figure smiled. It was the first time I saw its face. There wasn't one. Only darkness. Then the room filled with the sound of crying. Dr. Bennett continued. He refused to stop. Stay with me, Sarah. I heard him say it again. Then something grabbed him. His body lifted from the floor. He screamed. I watched him disappear into the darkness near the ceiling. The lights came back. He was gone. There was no blood. No body. Nothing. Only his glasses lying beside the operating table. Then the baby cried. A real baby. A little girl. The room became silent. I looked down. She was alive. Perfectly normal. I held her against my chest. The crying stopped. Then she opened her eyes. She looked directly at me. And whispered. Daddy is outside. I froze. My husband had been dead for 2 years. Then something knocked on the hospital window. 3 times. I looked toward the glass. My husband's face was pressed against it. He smiled. And behind him stood the tall figure. I couldn't move. I couldn't even look away from the window. My husband's face remained perfectly still against the glass, his eyes fixed on the baby in my arms. He looked exactly as he had the last time I saw him alive. Not older. Not changed. Just smiling. That was what frightened me most. He had never smiled like that. I looked down at my daughter. She was quiet now. Too quiet. Her tiny fingers were wrapped around mine, but her eyes were still open. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking toward the window. "Who is Daddy?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly turned her head toward the glass. The figure behind my husband moved closer. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching her. Then the hospital intercom crackled. A woman's voice came through the speaker. "Sarah." I recognized it immediately. It was my own voice. "Sarah, don't let him in." The window knocked again. 3 times. My husband lifted one hand and placed it against the glass. My daughter suddenly began crying. The sound was small and frightening. I pulled her against my chest and stepped away from the window. Then her crying stopped. She whispered something into my ear. "He can't come in." I almost relaxed. Then she finished. "Because he's already inside." I felt something cold touch the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. I was terrified that if I looked, I would see the thing standing behind me. My daughter suddenly gripped my finger tighter. Her tiny hand trembled. "Mommy," she whispered. "What?" She stared over my shoulder. "He's looking at you." I closed my eyes. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I heard a slow breath directly behind my ear. It sounded human. Almost gentle. I opened my eyes and looked at the window. My husband's face was gone. The tall figure was still there. But now it was standing alone. And its hand was pressed against the glass exactly where my husband's hand had been. I don't remember leaving the hospital. I only remember holding my daughter while nurses ran through the halls, screaming that the doors wouldn't open. The hospital had become a prison. Every exit was locked. Every telephone was dead. Every clock showed 2:13. I carried the baby toward the emergency entrance. My husband's voice followed me. "Sarah." I didn't turn around. "Sarah, wait." I kept walking. The baby started crying. Then she whispered, "Don't let him see my face." I stopped. That was when I understood. She wasn't afraid of him. She knew him. I ran outside. The parking lot was empty. No cars. No people. Only rain. I drove straight toward the old church. I don't know why. Maybe because every answer had been waiting there. Inside the church, I found a room beneath the floor. The walls were covered with photographs. Every woman. Every child. Every doctor. All the people who had disappeared. I found Dr. Bennett. His photograph had been added recently. Beside it was a photograph of me. And beside mine was my daughter. The date beneath her photograph was tomorrow. I nearly dropped the baby. Then I heard footsteps behind me. The tall figure entered the room. I couldn't move. It looked at the child. Then at me. "You carried her back." I asked what it wanted. It answered. "She belongs to this place." I told it no. It stepped closer. Then the baby began crying. The figure stopped. For the first time, it looked afraid. My daughter opened her eyes. She stared directly at it. Then she spoke. Not like a baby. Like an old woman. You failed again. The figure stepped backward. I stared at my daughter. She turned toward me. Mommy, we have to leave before he wakes up. Who? She pointed toward the floor. The first one. The boards beneath us began shaking. Something underneath the church started knocking. 3 times. Then 3 more. The entire building trembled. The tall figure disappeared. I grabbed my daughter and ran. Behind me, the floor split open. Something enormous moved beneath the church. I heard hundreds of voices screaming at once. Women. Children. Doctors. All of them saying the same thing. Don't let him wake up. I escaped through the woods before dawn. I thought the nightmare was over. It wasn't. Because when I looked at my daughter in the car, I noticed something on her wrist. A small black mark. 5 fingers. The same mark from the ultrasound. And beneath it was a number. 213. I stared at the mark until my eyes began to hurt. I rubbed it with my thumb, expecting the ink to disappear, but the skin was completely smooth. There was nothing raised. Nothing I could wipe away. Yet the number remained. My daughter watched me silently from the passenger seat. Does it hurt? She shook her head. Do you know what it means? She looked toward the church through the rain-streaked window. He knows where we are. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Who? She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lifted her marked wrist and placed it against the window. The rain outside suddenly stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Every drop hanging in the air. I looked through the windshield. The entire forest had gone still. No wind. No birds. No movement. Then my dashboard clock flickered. 2:12. I stared at it. The numbers changed. 2:13. My daughter whispered. Don't look behind you. I froze. Something shifted in the back seat. The seat belt moved slightly. Then the leather sank down, as if someone had just sat there. I could feel the weight behind me. I wanted to turn around. Every instinct told me to look. But my daughter grabbed my arm. Mommy. Her voice was shaking now. He doesn't like when you see him. I stared straight ahead. The rearview mirror slowly tilted downward by itself. I could see the back seat. It was empty. Then, for 1 second, a pale hand appeared behind my daughter's head. 5 fingers. I blinked. It was gone. My daughter didn't react. She simply whispered. He's waiting for the clock to stop. The dashboard began making a faint clicking sound. 2:13. The number didn't change. The engine died. And from somewhere deep beneath the car, something knocked 3 times. I left West Virginia before sunrise. I never returned to the town. I never saw Walter again. I never found out what happened to the church. And I never found Dr. Bennett's body. For years, I told myself that the pregnancy had been a medical mystery, that stress and trauma had distorted my memories, and that whatever I thought I saw that night had been caused by exhaustion. I raised my daughter somewhere far away. She grew up healthy. Normal. At least that's what I thought. She never talked about the church. She never mentioned the figure. She never asked about her father. Until she turned 7. On her birthday, She woke me at 2:13 in the morning. She was standing beside my bed. "Mommy." I opened my eyes. "What happened?" She looked toward the bedroom door. "Someone is outside." I sat up. "Who?" She whispered. "Daddy." I felt every muscle in my body freeze. Then 3 knocks came from the front door. My daughter smiled. "He found us." I told her to stay behind me. I walked toward the hallway. 3 more knocks. I reached the door. Then I heard a voice. My husband's voice. "Sarah, open the door." I closed my eyes. I remembered the hospital. The church. The photographs. The thing that had followed me. I didn't open it. The voice changed. It became Dr. Bennett. Then Walter. Then my mother's voice. Then finally my own. "Sarah, please." I backed away. My daughter started crying. I turned toward her. She wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling. Her eyes were completely black. I couldn't move. She whispered. "Mommy, you were never supposed to take me away." The front door opened by itself. There was nobody outside. Only darkness. Then the hallway lights went out. I heard footsteps coming toward us. Slow. Heavy. 3 knocks came from my bedroom door. But I was standing in the hallway. I looked at my daughter. She whispered. "Don't look behind you." I did anyway. The tall figure was standing there. But this time, it wasn't looking at my daughter. It was looking at me. And then I understood the truth. The baby had never been the thing it wanted. The pregnancy had never been about creating a body for the entity. It had been about bringing me back. The child wasn't possessed. She was the doorway. I dropped to my knees. The figure moved closer. My daughter took my hand. Then she whispered. "It's okay, Mommy." I asked her why. She smiled. "Because you're the last one." That was the last thing I remember. The police found my house 3 days later. The front door was locked from the inside. There was no sign of me. No sign of my daughter. No sign of anyone entering or leaving. But they found one thing on the bedroom wall. A photograph. It showed a woman standing in front of an old church. Beside her was a little girl. Behind them stood a tall figure. And written beneath the photograph was a date. October 2001. The strange part was that the photograph had been taken almost 20 years earlier. And on the back, someone had written. "The mother always disappears. The child always survives. And every 13 years, someone hears the crying again." That photograph was found in the hospital archives years later. Alongside hundreds of others. All showing different women. Different children. Different doctors. But the same figure. And the same time. 2:13 a.m. The last photograph was different. It showed an empty hospital room. A woman was sitting on the edge of the bed. Her face was hidden. A child stood beside her. And behind them, reflected in the dark window, was the figure. On the back of the photograph were 4 words. "She's pregnant again." For several minutes, nobody touched the photograph. The archivist who discovered it later said the room felt strangely cold, even though the heating system was working. He noticed something else. The woman's hands were resting on her stomach. As if she were trying to protect something inside her. Then he heard a faint sound behind him. A soft, distant cry. He turned toward the empty hallway. There was nobody there. He looked back at the photograph. The child in the image was no longer looking at the camera. She was looking directly toward him. And beneath the old timestamp, a new mark had appeared. 2:13. The archivist checked the clock above the doorway. It had stopped at exactly 2:13. He looked back at the photograph. The woman's face was still hidden. But now one detail had changed. Her head was turned slightly toward the archivist. As if she had heard him standing there. He stepped away from the frame. The crying stopped. Then the child in the photograph slowly raised one hand. 5 fingers pressed against the inside of the glass. The first thing I noticed about Daniel Reed was that he never looked at the door. Most patients glance at the door when they enter my office. People want to know where the exit is. Daniel didn't. He sat across from my desk, hands folded between his knees, staring at the empty space beside my left shoulder. Not at me, beside me. I had practiced psychiatry in Athens for 19 years. I just smiled. Daniel, I'm Dr. Nikolaos Vasilis. I know. His accent was American. He was 21, an Oregon student in Athens whose disturbing behavior led his family to keep him in Greece under psychiatric supervision. According to the referral documents, Daniel had insomnia, auditory hallucinations, panic attacks, and confusion. He was also convinced someone was following him. That was not unusual. What interested me was what came next. His psychiatrist had written one sentence in bold at the bottom of the report. Patient refuses to sleep because he believes something enters his dreams. I looked at Daniel. Do you believe that? Yes. What enters your dreams? He looked at me. A man. What does he look like? Daniel swallowed. I don't know. You've never seen his face. I've never seen his face because he doesn't have one. He said it calmly. I made a note. Does he speak to you? Daniel nodded. What does he say? He asks me where I am. And what do you tell him? His eyes moved toward the empty space. I tell him I'm in Greece. His expression changed, and he looked afraid. And that's when he gets angry. Why? Because Greece isn't where I came from. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. He leaned forward. Doctor, do you believe dreams can remember people? No. You should. I just smiled. Why? Because last night I dreamed about you. You dreamed about me? Yes. What happened? Daniel stared at me. You were standing in this room. Here. Yes. What were you doing? You were crying. I had not been crying. Daniel continued. You were behind your desk, but the room was different. How? There was water on the floor. And someone was sitting in my chair. I looked at the chair. Who? Daniel's voice dropped. You. He pointed at the chair. You were sitting there. I looked at him. Then who was standing behind my desk? Daniel smiled. The other you. The session ended. I told myself I was dealing with an intelligent young man whose anxiety had developed into hallucinations. That explanation lasted until I returned home. I live alone in an old apartment in Athens. I made coffee, read, and went to bed. I slept almost immediately. Then I dreamed. I was in my office. The lights were off, and water covered the floor. I could hear something dripping somewhere behind me. I turned around. Daniel was sitting in my chair. He looked as he had that morning. His hands were folded between his knees. He stared at me. Then he smiled. You shouldn't have asked me about the man. I woke up instantly. My bedroom was dark. I checked the clock. 2:13 a.m. I sat there, trying to calm myself. Then I heard something. 3 slow knocks. Not on my front door. On the wall beside my bed. Knock. 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 The sound came again. This time, from the opposite wall. Knock. 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 I turned on the lamp. Nothing. I checked the apartment. Every door and window was closed. I stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, Daniel was already waiting outside my office. He looked tired. You dreamed about me, he said. How do you know? He stared at me. You were crying. Daniel lowered his voice. And there was water on the floor. For the first time in my career, I was afraid of a patient. Not because he was violent or unpredictable, but because he had described something he couldn't possibly know. I closed the door. Daniel, tell me everything about the man in your dreams. He looked toward the window. Then he whispered. He isn't a man. What is he? Daniel turned back to me. He's the reason my family sent me here. Why Greece? His face went pale. Because this is where he died. Who died? Daniel's eyes moved toward the empty chair beside my desk. The first doctor who saw him. That afternoon, I called Daniel's parents. They confirmed Daniel had never mentioned a Greek doctor. They also told me something deliberately left out of the referral. Daniel's grandmother was Greek. Before her death, she repeatedly warned him never to sleep in rooms where the walls were wet. I asked why. His father fell silent. He said. She believed something lived underneath the old houses. I almost laughed, then stopped. That night, after everyone had gone home, I returned to my office and found moisture across the floor. It started beneath Daniel's chair. And ended behind mine. There were footprints in it. Bare feet. They crossed the room slowly, then stopped beside my desk. I followed them with my eyes. Nothing was there. But on my desk, written in water, were 4 words. He knows you now. I didn't call the police. I didn't call anyone. I stood behind my desk staring at the words written in water, searching for a rational explanation. There wasn't. I wiped the message away. When I finished, Daniel was still sitting outside my office, unmoving. You saw it, he said. Saw what? The message. My mouth went dry. How did you know? Daniel looked toward the floor. He wrote it for you. I opened the door. Come inside. He entered slowly, terrified. Daniel, tell me what happened before you came to Greece. He sat. I started dreaming about the same house. What house? I don't know where. Describe it. Stone walls. Narrow windows. A staircase underground. Have you been there? No. Then how? I've been there every night for 6 months. A man always waits at the bottom. Same man? Yes. What does he want? He wants me to open a door. Which door? I never reach it. Why? Someone always wakes me. Who? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. You. You're always there. He looked toward the corner. You stand behind me and tell me not to open it. I said nothing. Last night you weren't there. What happened? The man opened the door himself. What did you see? A hospital room. My pen stopped. What was inside? A bed. And a woman. Who? He lowered his voice. You. The room went cold. You were lying on the bed. Was I alive? He nodded. You were awake. What were you doing? Crying. Why? Because someone stood beside you. Who? Daniel met my eyes. The man. I stood. The session was over. I told him to return to his apartment until I contacted his family. He refused. You can't send me away. Why? He follows you when I'm not here. What did you say? Daniel pointed behind me. He's standing there. I turned. Nothing. Daniel stared at the floor. Water pooled beneath his chair. A small puddle. Another drop landed beside it. The ceiling was dry. Another drop fell. Then another. Daniel whispered. Don't look up. Nothing was above us, but I heard slow, deep breathing overhead. Daniel grabbed my wrist. Don't let him know you're afraid. I pulled away. Daniel, what is happening? He knows your name. How? He heard me. The office lights died. Complete darkness. Something dragged itself across the floor beside Daniel. My phone lit up. 2:13 a.m. It was 4:40 p.m. The clock had changed. Daniel whispered. Don't move. I heard footsteps. 1, 2, 3. They stopped behind me. A voice spoke by my ear. It was my own voice. Doctor. I couldn't breathe. Open the door. Daniel was crying. The door handle began turning. Slowly. I reached for it. Daniel grabbed my hand. No. It stopped. Silence. Then 3 knocks came from inside the wall. Knock. 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 Daniel looked at me. It's underneath. The clinic stood over an older stone foundation. I assumed the basement was sealed. I was wrong. We found the entrance behind a cabinet. The wooden door was swollen with moisture. No lock. It opened easily. A narrow staircase disappeared into darkness. The smell below was unmistakable. Wet earth, mold, and something older. Daniel followed. You've been here before. He shook his head. No. You said you've never seen this. I haven't. Then how do you know where the stairs lead? He stared into the darkness. They're in my dreams. We descended. A stone corridor waited below. Old medical instruments littered the floor. Rusty tables. Broken glass. A metal bed. And dozens of names carved into the walls. I moved closer. Every name had a date. The dates went back over a century. Daniel stopped. His breathing changed. What? He pointed ahead. A wooden door waited at the end. The same door from his dreams. I walked toward it. Daniel grabbed my coat. Don't. Why? The man waits here. Something scratched beyond it. Once. Twice. 3 times. He knows we're here. The scratching stopped. The door opened by itself. Inside, a small room. There was a chair in the center. A desk. An old medical lamp. A photograph hung on the wall. I moved closer. It showed a young Greek doctor beside the same chair. It was dated 1911. I recognized him from Daniel's dreams. He stared at the camera. The tall figure stood behind him, hand on his shoulder. Daniel stared at it. "I know him," he whispered. "Who?" "The first doctor." I turned it over. Writing covered the back. I thought I was treating the patient. Below it, I was the patient. Daniel screamed. I turned. The door behind us was closed. 3 slow knocks came from outside. Then a voice. My voice. Dr. Vasily's. Daniel backed into the wall. The voice returned. "It's your turn." The lights died. The air felt heavier, and silence pressed against my ears while the darkness around us waited without moving. In the darkness, Daniel whispered something I'll never forget. "Doctor, don't answer him." Then the voice came from inside the room. "Close." Too late.